Yes, Arosha, you can start, I think so.
Okay, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. I warmly welcome you all to our webinar program, From Sound to Sense, Phonological Processes in Literary Interpretation. We are thrilled to have you join us for today, what promises to be an enlightening and engaging exploration of the phonology. So this program organized by fourth year students, languages students of Department of Languages and Communication Studies, Trincomalee campus, Eastern University, Sri Lanka. And this event is facilitated by Dr. Nirupa Jayasundara, Senior Lecturer on Linguistics, Department of Languages and Communication Studies, Trincomalee campus, Eastern University, Sri Lanka. Today, our honorable guest, Professor Amitabh Vikram Dwivedi, Head of Information and Language Technology, Central Institute of Hindi, Agra. So, with his wealth of knowledge, he will guide us through sense of insightful discussion today. So, without further extension, let's welcome our esteemed speaker. So, I'm honored to invite our senior lecturer, Dr. Nirupa Jayasundara, to welcome our speaker today. Madam.
Thank you, Arosha. So am I audible? Arosha?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So, good evening, everyone. Our guest lecturer, speaker, Professor Amitabh Vikram Dwivedi, Professor and Head of the Department of Information and Language Technology, Institute of Hindi, Delhi, India. My colleagues, my dear students, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this important academic talk on From Sounds to Sense, Phonological Processes in Literary Interpretation on this online platform by Professor Amitabh, who is kind enough to consent to deliver us this lecture amidst his busy schedules. It's my honor and privilege to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Amitabh Vikram Dwivedi, for today's academic talk. When I request Professor Dwivedi to send his CV, he sent me around 60 pages booklet instead, which speaks volumes of his contribution to the academia in the field of linguistics and literature. In fact, Professor needs no introduction, as he is a renowned expert in the field of linguistics internationally, but it's my honor and duty to say a few amidst his numerous contributions to the academia. Professor Amitabh completed his undergraduation in MDS University, Rajasthan, India, MA and B.Ed in English in Central Institute of Foreign Languages, CIFL, MA in Linguistics in JNU, Delhi, and PhD in Rajpur National University, India. Dr. Amitabh Vikram is a Harvard University certified in the art of writing and public speaking, and a university faculty specialized in linguistics and literature in the School of Languages and Literature at Sri Maha Vaishno Devi University, Jammu and Kashmir, India, currently on extraordinary special leave and serving in the Institute of Hindi, Agra, Delhi, as a head of the department. His research interests include language documentation, writing descriptive grammars, and preservation of rare and endangered languages in South Asia. And he won several academic awards for his contribution to the academia locally and internationally. The National Digital Library of India, NDLI, Ministry of Education, India, features his 19 lectures in the public domain. Also, the UNESCO Atlas of the World Languages in Danger refers to his two works, Badawa language
Because I am
official website. His published books are found in the libraries of University of Stanford and Princeton. He has contributed numerous papers to many science citation, index, and Scopus journals, and contributed more than 180 research chapters to knowledge resources, chiefly EBSCO and encyclopedias, published by Springer Nature, Sage, Rauman, and Littlefield, and ABC CLIO publications. He has also been a co-director for the research project entitled A Comprehensive Study of Culture, Philosophy, Literature, and Language, sanctioned by the Indian Council of Social Science Research. As a poet, he has published numerous poems in different anthologies, journals, and magazines worldwide. Until recently, his poem Mother has been published as a prologue to Motherhood and War, International Perspectives, Palgrave Macmillan Press. You can learn more about his incredible accomplishments and expertise by visiting his profile and his YouTube channel. So please join me in welcoming Professor Dwivedi and get ready to be inspired by our amazing guest speaker. Now, I respectfully invite Professor Amitabh Vikram Dwivedi to deliver his special lecture. Over to you, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your kind introduction. And I welcome all the participants who have joined me here, particularly students and beginners who are planning to do further research. And I hope I have 1 hour to talk, and I will try to finish my talk in this 1 hour. So as you can see from the title, from sound to sense, and this is the way generally when we are conducting or when we are writing a research paper, generally we divide our title into two parts. One part is the main, and the second part that is in the right hand side, that is the explanatory. So phonological processes in literary interpretation. We will discuss what we are going to do in this presentation, because certain words are quite important here. As you can see, that sound is one such word here, and here sound reflects that phonological process that we are going to deal with, and sense reflects meaning. So the literary interpretation that we have using phonological processes, or if we give little care, little attention to phonological processes, then how we can enrich our literary interpretation. So this is the summary of the title, or you can say the description of the title that I'm going to deal in this presentation. But before I delve deep into this topic, I would like to highlight that if you have some linguistic knowledge, then how that linguistic knowledge can enrich your literary interpretation. I'll give you one example, and this example is from an excerpt from a hymn. I read it for you. This Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, who of thy tender mercy didst give thine only Son, Jesus Christ, to suffer death upon the cross for our redemption. Now, this is one excerpt of that hymn, and if I ask you, what does it mean? Because meaning is important for us in life, and we are always meaning seekers. So you will say, God gives his only Son, Jesus, to save human beings, and he died for us. But this is only one sentence. And if I ask you that, can you tell me something more about this, then you can say that this excerpt is from a liturgical prayer, and the variety of language used is religious English, and the the context where this hymn is used is church service. So this much you can say without adding something concrete to something concrete linguistic knowledge to the text. So this is in general, let's say a layman's knowledge of reading something. But as a researcher, as a student, this is not suffice. This is not sufficient. So if what if you have linguistic knowledge? So let's say linguistic knowledge gives special focus on certain words, special focus on certain sounds, special focus on certain construction. So when you are focused, then you can see that here you have a use of vocative case, Almighty God, and there is also a usage of relative clause, who of thy tender mercy. Now this is one thing. Finding out what is there is one thing. That is like statistics. That is like the data. But finding out what is there is not that important, but what is the function of that usage that makes your interpretation better. So, but the step is first finding out. So first, when you find out that, okay, there is vocative case, then you need to find out what is the function of that vocative case. First, you find out there is relative clause. Second, what is the function of that relative clause? So similarly, you have example of vocative case, you have example of relative clause, then you have example of capitonym. The F of father and the S of son is capitalized. Then you can see the word order is not regular. Who of thy tender mercy is like inversing the syntax. So in regular syntax, when we talk about English language, then generally we use subject, verb, and object. But here, who of thy tender mercy in place of the tender mercy of whom? So inversion of syntax is another such a phenomenon we have noticed here. Then we can see certain archaic use of words like thy and thine and didst. Then we also have some examples of collocations like suffer, death, cross, redemption. So the thing is, when we have linguistic focus, or when we are able to find out what is so linguistically peculiar here, then we are able to find out the function. So when previously the same text and we had only one sentence to say, God gives his only son Jesus to save human beings and he died for us. But since we have discovered so many things, now we have at least 6 sentences to talk about this text. And what are those things? So we can say the text begins with a vocative expression that directly addresses God, by which the connection between the addressee and address is well established. So first, vocative case we discovered, and later on what is the function of that vocative case. Second, like the inversion of syntax. So that is the first thing, like we discovered there is an inversion of syntax, but what is the function of that? The function is like it topicalizes God, but this time it is substituted by the relative pronoun who. Then the archaic use of past or tense auxiliary didst establishes its link, indicating that the prayer is quite ancient and has been used by the ancestors as well. So something that is traditional, something that is associated with our ancestors becomes precious for us. And the capitalization is an example of capitonym which removes it from the biological relations and establishes heavenly connection. So we are not actually talking about the biological father and son, but here we are talking about some spiritual relationship between the father and the son. And the use of thy, thine is also in line with the Old English, but it also has an alliterative function. And the collocation, suffer, death, cross, redemption, is well suited for the religious prayer. So I have started this talk that how linguistic knowledge enriches your textual analysis. Now I'll come to the main topic, that is the phonological process. Now we need to understand that phonology is different from phonetics because these two words are used interchangeably, but that usage is wrong because phonetics is general and phonetic is the general scientific study of human speech sound. But when it comes to phonology, then phonology is specific. And phonology is the scientific study of sound patterning in spoken languages. So we have general phonetics, but we cannot have general phonology. We have a specific phonology. For example, phonology of Sinhalese, phonology of Hindi, English phonology, French phonology. So we have different phonologies, but we have general phonetics. So what do we study in phonetics and phonology? So generally in phonetics, we study speech sounds and how they are used in language. But when it comes to phonology, then context becomes important because sounds, they occur in certain context. So we have different, there is a possibility that we have two languages and in that language we have more or less same sound, but they sound so different because the context in which those sounds occur, they are quite different. So this patterning is quite important, and particularly here in this talk, I'm taking into consideration the English phonology because I've taken examples from the certain poetry, some fiction, and I'm talking about the phonological processes used by the writers. So when it comes to English phonology, then one thing comes into my mind, and I reiterate, it is said by G.B. Shaw, and he talks about the inadequacies of English writing system. So different languages, they employ different writing system. For example, English employs Roman alphabet system. Hindi has Devanagari script as a writing system. Urdu language uses Arabic script. So similarly, we have different languages using different writing system. But when we talk about English language, then G.B. Shaw highlighted inadequacies of English writing system. And very famously in an anecdote, he said that fish should be pronounced as goti. So how is it possible that fish can be pronounced as goti? And in a very interesting note, he said like, you have three words, like one word is enough. You can see the last sound of enough is f sound, and women, the middle sound is e in women, and nation, the middle sound is sh. So when you take the letters from enough, women, and nation, so you have GHOTI. So last two letters of enough, second letter of women, and third and fourth letter of nation. So it becomes Ghoti, spelling wise, GHOTI. But the sounds that are used here, they correspond to the letters, they correspond to different sound. For example, GH corresponds to F, and the letter O corresponds to E, and letter TI corresponds to S and H. So considering this, like you are never be sure about the pronunciation of English words, and all the time you learn new spellings because you are never sure about the spelling of English words. Certain words you remember because you have used them quite often, so you know how to spell them. But when you encounter a new word, there is very much a possibility that you need to look at the dictionary because the letters and the sounds, there is no one-to-one correspondence between them. So this thing does not happen in the Hindi language or in Sanskrit. The way you speak is the way you write, and therefore this system is known as the alpha syllabary system. So this peculiarity we need to keep in mind, and because all of us we have been educated in the English medium system, so we do not face any problem, and the English comes quite natural to us. But this is the peculiarity that we need to think of, and particularly when we are teaching a second language learner, then we need to think of like what is the first language of the child or the learner. And because of the influence of the first language, the child is facing certain problems. So we need to be more kind, compassionate when it comes to come to come to a second language learner who is facing difficulty speaking English language or learning how to pronounce a particular word or particular sound. So this is one thing that we need to keep in mind. Now we move to the next important word, that is the part of the title, that is interpretation. Now, what do we mean by interpretation? Interpretation is the process of seeking meaning. And when it comes to reading literary text, then generally we have two things. We have interpretation and we have the theory. So sometimes like we use the word literary theory, and sometimes we use the phrase literary interpretation. Now, again, like phonetics and phonology, many people, they use these two terms interchangeably, but they are not to be used interchangeably, because there is very slight but important difference we find. So interpretation is general, and interpretation is like focused, it is focused on the linguistic part, the language part. Whereas when it comes to theory, then theory is like perspective. Theory is like using different lens. For example, if I give you a yellow colored lens, then the entire world will look like yellow color. If I give you a red color goggle or specs, then the entire world will look red. So the theory is that perspective. Theory is that lens. And one lens is not sufficient to see everything. So we have different lenses. We have different theoretical perspective. For example, feminism is one such lens. Marxism is one such lens. Then psychoanalysis is one such lens. Queer theory is one such lens. So we have different lenses. So we are not talking about the theoretical system, the lenses, but what is the primary thing is getting what is on the page. So that is like you need to find out the linguistic peculiarity used by the writer. And how can you do that? You can do that through critical reading. So here the meaning of critical is not the medical one that is serious, but the critical here means something that is close and careful reading. So you need to first analyze the text, read the text, then analyze it, then interpret it, and then evaluate it. So this is the step number one. And once you have evaluated it, then you can employ some perspective. But here in this presentation, I'm not going to the theoretical system, but our focus is on the linguistic meaning and how the phonological process, they enrich the text that we are going to deal with here. So when we have interpretation, that means like we have some interpreter. So interpreter is like someone who reads the text and who reaches to some meaning. So you and I are interpreters, because we are reading a text and we are reaching to some meaning, and how this process goes on, because anything that is written has some form, and that form corresponds to some meaning. So let's say a dog. So dog is a form. So dog has like a sound form and written form. So in sound form, you have three sounds like d or g, and written form you have 3 letters D-O-G. So sound also corresponds to meaning, and these letters, they also corresponds to meaning. So, and we know that there is no one-to-one correspondence between form and meaning. That's why Saussure, Ferdinand Saussure, the founder of modern linguistics, once said that the relationship between signifier and signified is arbitrary. So arbitrary here means there is a social agreement that from now onwards, like DOG refers to a four-legged canine animal that can be domesticated, the general dictionary meaning. But it can be used metaphorically when you say a phrase like a poor dog, and when you say a poor dog to a man, that means like you talk about the poverty or like the pettiness of his life. So that way context also plays an important role when we interpret the meaning, or when we reach into some interpretation. But here, like this circular process is important, that there is one interpreter, and generally interpreter is also termed as a subject, because generally a subject has an agency, and agency makes someone to react what someone reads and to reach to the meaning. That's why you have one sentence, and the one sentence has different interpretation, because as everyone who reads that text has an agency and applies his or her knowledge to reach to the meaning. Now, when it comes to interpretation, so poetry is one such literary text, and you try to interpret what you read. So let's say this is a very famous poem by William Black, Tiger, tiger burning bright in the forest of the night, and what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry. Now, when you try to interpret it, then there is a possibility that one interpretation is like someone who has killed a tiger and consumed the meat of the tiger, and the stomach is burning because the person has consumed the meat of the tiger. The tiger, tiger burning bright can be interpreted as like the burning in the stomach or a dietary problem. But do you think such type of interpretation is valid? That is not valid, because again, every interpretation is not a good interpretation. So that means like there is a filter, and each interpretation must pass through that filter. And what is that filter? That filter is basically known as the interpretive community, a phrase used by Stanley Fish in his very popular essay, Is There a Text in This Class? So again, there is one anecdote associated with this story, that once after the class, one student comes to Stanley Fish and she asks, like, is there a text in this class? So generally, a teacher-student scenario, that after first class, generally students, they are inquisitive. They ask about what are the titles of the important text. So similarly, one such girl comes to Stanley Fish and asks, like, is there a text in this class? And Stanley Fish, like a regular understanding of this phrase, is there a text in this class, he starts naming certain titles. But the student interrupts Stanley Fish, and she says that no, is there a text in this class? So again, the same phrase. That means here the meaning is not the title of certain text, but what is the perspective that we are using in this class. So the meaning is like one such line, one such sentence, one such word is open to many interpretation, but all interpretations are not valid. So as I said, like there are certain communities known as interpretive communities, and those communities, they work as a filter, and they approve certain interpretations and they disapprove certain interpretation. So for example, tiger, tiger burning bright can never be a dietary problem that a person has killed a tiger and consumed the meat of the tiger, because the interpretive communities will not approve to this interpretation. So who are the people who are associated with this interpretive communities? To take it very generally, then you and I are also the part of interpretive communities. So something that is very commonsensical is, or the readers, the audience, the editors, the professors, the critics, all they are, or the writer, they are the part of interpretive communities, and certain interpretations they approve and certain interpretations they disapprove. So that thing we need to keep in mind when we study from sound to sense, that though as an agent, as an interpreter, as a subject, you are free. You are free, you have an agency to give meaning to something that you have read. But again, you are not that much free to say anything what you feel like. So again, like very popularly, and most of the time I use this type of example with my student, that the way you talk to your father is not the way you talk to your mother. The way you talk to your friend is not the way you talk to your teacher. So that means we know what to say when, with whom. And if we know this better, then the life is always a success story for us. And if we do not know this, then definitely life will create many hurdles for us. So interpretation is important, but you need to keep in mind that whether this interpretation is going to be accepted or not. So we have certain stubborn interpreters as well. And when we talk about stubborn interpreters, then the Jacques Derrida, then Stanley Fish and Harold Bloom comes to our mind. Now, what is the meaning of stubborn interpreters that we have? Stubborn interpreters, they not only generate new meanings, but they give logical explanation of those meanings. And we do not have any choice but to accept those new meanings for us. So I'm not saying that new meanings are not accepted. New meanings are accepted, but you need to keep in mind that those new meanings are supported with valid arguments, logical arguments. So about stubborn interpreters, M.H. Abrams once said, like, literal normative meanings were overruled by stubborn interpreters who impose their own meanings. So this imposing, the act of imposing is not like a forceful, because we live in democracy, but it is by valid argument and logical reasoning that we have. So similarly, in that line, I remember what Chomsky once said about appropriateness and grammaticality. And there is one phrase used by Noam Chomsky in his book Syntactic Structures, published in 1957. And this phrase goes like this, that colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Now, when you try to find out the grammar of this sentence, you find that the grammar is perfectly fine, because you have a sentence where ideas are the head noun and it is modified by green and colorless. And then you have like a verb that is, again, the verb agrees with the head noun subject ideas, and you have an adverb furiously. So the grammar is perfectly fine, but when we try to look at the appropriateness, that means the meaningfulness of this, then we find that this sentence has no meaning, because there are so many contradictory ideas that are there in this. Because ideas, generally they do not sleep. Human beings, insects, organism, they can sleep, but not ideas. And even if when someone sleeps, then no one can sleep furiously. You can sleep calmly, peacefully, nicely. And then ideas, they do not have any color. And if something has a color, cannot be at the same time colorless. So again, it is like illogical. Though it has perfectly grammatical, but it has no meaning. Now, again, coming back to the phrase that used by G.B. Shaw, inadequacies of English writing system. So when we look at a word, then we find that the way we write that word, the way we pronounce that word has nothing to do with the meaning that is associated with that word. There are only very few words uh, which are actually copied from the nature known as onomatopoeic words. And they are very few in numbers, not more than 500 in English language, where like the dog is bow bow and the cock cock a doodle doo, or when there is a bell rings, then it is a ding dong. So again, like very few words that copies the nature of that particular sound, but most of the words are conventional. So you have a word like dog, but it has nothing to do with the shape of the dog. So again, like you have an agreement that dog, a four-legged canine animal that can be domesticated. Fine. So in the similar line, like we have the founder of modern linguistics, Faninandi Saussure, and there is a book titled after his name, Course in General Linguistics, published in 1916. And there is a phrase in that book he has used, like everything depends upon relations. So this is very true when it comes to when we look at our society. Our parents are important for us, our teachers are important for us, and the people who live around us, they are important for us. So that way relations are also important. But here Saussure is talking about not the societal relationship, but Saussure is talking about how one sign relates to other sign, and how other sign relates to another sign. Because I remember Ludwig Wittgenstein once said in his Tractatus that everything, that word in itself has no meaning, but meaning lies in the context. So that means like simply say dog, then dog has no meaning as such. I need to use that word dog in certain context. So similarly, individual sounds, they do not have any meaning. Once you combine those sounds, then they generate different meaning. For example, like dog, and I have three sounds, d, or g. If they come in this order, then it means animal. And if I change the order of the sound, it becomes God, g or d. So that means like the sounds, how you place them, how to use them, that is more important. The context is more important. So sign can be a one sound g or d or d or g, and how they interact with each other, that is more important. So that thing we need to keep in mind when we go for the interpretation. Then the semantic relations are also important, like what comes before or after that particular word or sound. So as I said, like three sounds, at one time it becomes dog, and another time it becomes God. So similarly, when it comes to rhyming, then obviously in English poetry, generally we find that end rhyme is also used quite often, or sometimes like two similar sounding words, they are used as in alliteration, example of alliteration, or like the same quality of vowel is used in the example of assonance. So that is also important. So when we use language, particularly when we use sound, when we use words, when we use phrases, then always there is a choice. There is a choice to use one specific type of construction, whether you are using a sound or word or syntax, and that choice is available to all the speakers who use this language. So it is not the case like that that is only available to writer, but writer are more cautious. They know how to use those words, or you can say that they play with the words if there is no exaggeration. So that choices is also focused by Faninandi Saussure, and he talks about two axes of semantic relations. Semantic here means the meaning relations. So one is such paradigmatic, and another one is the syntagmatic. And the paradigmatic is the relation of contrast and substitution, whereas the syntagmatic relation is the combination and co-occurrence restrictions. So for example, as a novice writer, when you are writing a poem, and the first line is like the sun is shining bright, then this is a lovely sight. So you feel that bright and sight, they goes semantically quite well with each other, as well as like you have a choice to use, like sun is shining bright. So what could be the other word that I will use? So I will have the end rhyme. So that type of choices is always available to writers as well as to us as well. So in the start, in the beginning of this presentation, I said like one thing is to find out what is so peculiar, and I use that the hymn, the Christian hymn I've used, and I showed it to you that inversion of syntax or the capitonym or let's say archaic use of words that was used. So that is one thing, that once you read a text, once you read a poem, then first you try to find out what is so peculiar, what is so different. But the next thing is like, what is the purpose of that? So again, like this sonnet, the two lines from the Shakespearean sonnet, like, shall I compare thee to a summer's day, and thou art more lovely and more temperate. So again, the choices are here. Like you can see the first sentence is not a declarative sentence, but an interrogative sentence. So Shakespeare could have made it a declarative sentence, like, I shall compare thee to a summer's day, instead of shall I compare thee to a summer's day. So this is a rhetorical question. So like a sonnet starting with a question is quite a peculiar thing, that it is not starting with a statement. Shakespeare could have used like, shall I compare thee to a spring's morning. So a summer's day, a spring's morning, you won't find any difference. But again, those choices were available with Shakespeare, and it is also available with you. Now, one that such choice makes uh, you as a writer and another as a ordinary speaker. So similarly, like after a few years, you will realize, once you look back at your own journey, academic journey, you will realize like what am I doing and what my friends are doing. Again, that is the choices you have made in your life that will cultivate your future. So I'm just saying that the choices are always there, and you need to know how you can utilize those choices. So similarly, thou art more lovely and more temperate. So in place of lovely and temperate, there is very much a possibility that you can use that thou art more calm and more beautiful. There is no harm in that. That also looks quite good. But again, the choices are always there. And because of those choices, literature becomes literature, and ordinary text or ordinary conversation remains ordinary. Now I will talk about the phonological processes. So there are various phonological processes. So assimilation is one such process. A sound becomes more like the nearby sound. Fine. So you have handbag, and you can see like hand and bag. So in place, like when you are very careful, then you will say handbag. But when you are saying in general, then generally you drop the d sound, and na and da becomes ma, handbag. Fine. So final consonant deletion, like cat, and like you can omit cat. Fine. So simply where like you think of your pet cat, and you are talking about where is the cat. So sometimes like you say cat with popular t sound, and sometimes like you drop when you are not that careful. Similarly, cluster reduction is also one such phonological process. So in place of saying spoon, you say poon. The consonant cluster is simplified into a single consonant. Otherwise, sa and pa, they are two consonants, but it becomes one, pa. Then weak syllable deletion, like banana. So the ba is the weak, the nana. Fine, unstressed syllable is omitted. I'm not saying like everyone omits this, and or everyone. Like if you are a very careful speaker, then always you will say handbag also. Fine, not handbag anytime. Or always say cat, not cat. Or always say spoon, not poon. So I'm not saying that you should become a lazy speaker, but I'm talking about the phonological processes and what are the terminology that are associated with that. So assimilation, final consonant deletion, cluster reduction, weak syllable deletion. Fine. Uh, then you have this reduplication. Like reduplication is like very popular in Indian languages, where you have a partial reduplication or full reduplication. And generally the word like a child utters in the very first year of his or her life, like mama. So ma is like sometimes ma becomes milk also, ma becomes mother also, ma becomes some other thing also. So it's like then very like very good. So very good presentation. So very good presentation. Very is an example of full reduplication. Like there is a there is a poem by Robert Burns, and the first line goes like, "My love is like a red rose." So again, like you can see, like my love is like a red rose. It is like quite common thing comparing your beloved with a love, or you're comparing your beloved with a rose. But using red two times, like my love is like a red rose, is example of full reduplication. At the same time, it makes it quite distinct from the regular conversation. Then fronting of the sound, like go becomes do, fine. So a sound produced at the back of the mouth is replaced with a sound produced at the front. Then stopping, like the fricative or affricate is replaced with a stop. Then gliding, so a liquid consonant ra or la is replaced with gliding wa. So rabbit becomes wabbit. So these are certain phonological processes, and these processes are involved once you use language consciously, subconsciously. You use them. So we find examples of these phonological processes in literature. Let's say, like in the example of dialect representation, writer may use phonological process to depict characters' speech patterns. So there is a novel, there is a short story, and there are different characters. Now all the characters cannot use the same type of language, and writers are quite expert in showing this. So what they reflect? They reflect regional and social dialects. So we have one example from the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and you have this example of there is a character Jim, a slave, speaks in a way that reflects African American vernacular English. So say who is you, what? So you can say in place of what, war is used, WHAR, dog, my cats, F, of I didn't. So you can see something in place of saying something, there is something. So there are various types of phonological processes they are involved. So first you need to find out those processes, and then you need to find out what is the function of that. Finding out the function, the second step is very crucial. Otherwise, your interpretation cannot reach to the betterment. Elision, like omitting certain sounds, that is quite often used, and particularly when we read William Shakespeare, we find elision. Like you can see over and V is omitted, like never, then V is omitted. Then alliteration and assonance, like previously I have used, like alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds, and assonance deals with the vowel sounds. So you can see, and the silken said uncertain rustling of each purple curtain. So here you have the example of assonance in plenty. Then you also have this I dialect, the use of non-standard spelling to represent colloquial speech or the character speech specific way of, that is known as I dialect. So we know the spelling of very is VERY, but it is like used like WERNY. So that is also there. Then onomatopoeia, I have already used, like the phonetically imitate these sounds or the auditory effect of the nature from the sound has been produced. Then the consonant clusters simplification is one such that we have, like spoon becomes spoon. So similar type of example that you have. Then the slang and the informal speech, that is also one such examples. Similarly, like alliteration, like the fair breeze blew, the white foam flew. So breeze and blew and foam and flew. Then furrow followed free, fur sound is repeated. Then the assonance, like I will arise and go now and go to ends free, and a small cabin built there of clay and wattles made. Fine. So many types of processes that are there. So that the thing is, like you need to use those processes. That is first thing. Then you have like caesura, a deliberate pause or a break in a line of poetry. So when to err is human, there is a break, to forgive divine. So that type of caesura that is there. Then enjambment or ajama you have, where the continuation of a sentence or a clause over a line break. For example, April is the cruelest month, breathing lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. So you can see this is one full sentence, but this sentence is not written like a prose. The continuation of a sentence or clause over a line break. So you have a break, like April is the cruelest month, breeding, a break, and then lilac out of the dead land, mixing, again a break, memory and desire, stirring, a break, dull roots with spring rain, likewise. So now I will demonstrate in last 10 minutes like how you read a text. The first thing is like you need to find out the peculiarities that are there. And here I have taken a text titled Virtue, a poem by George Herbert, and it is written in a didactic fashion. And George Herbert was a metaphysical poet, and the specification of the metaphysical poet is like the blending of thoughts, feeling, metaphysical concentration, unification of sensibility, and learnedness that you will find. So this is the general features of that particular age known as the metaphysical age or the metaphysical poetry. So the first step is you need to find out the peculiarities. And here you can see the peculiar word, like the spelling is quite different. So bridal has double L, sky has IE, thou, thy, angry, the spelling of angry is different. The title virtue, the spelling of virtue is also different. Like the present day virtue is VIRTUE, but here it is VERTUE. The music has extra K. So that is the first thing that you need to do. You need to find out that thing. That what is so peculiar, what is so different here. Then the second thing is like you need to find out the rhyme scheme that's there. And what is the rhyme scheme? Generally, you have either an iambic pentameter or you have a trochee or anapist or a dactyl or spondy. So these are very popular rhyme schemes. Like most of the time you will find like Shakespearean sonnets are written in iambic pentameter. So iambic here means unstressed, stressed. So unstressed, stressed makes it 1 foot. So when we talk about iambic pentameter, penta means 5. So that means like you have 10 syllables and 5 feet. So that way, but here as you can see, like the stanza 1, stanza 2, stanza 3, and stanza 4. So you can see like the poem has different rhyme scheme. Like the first 2 words, they are in spondy, like both are stressed. Spondy has 2 stressed, so sweet and day both are stressed. But rest the 3, so cool, so calm, so bright, they have the iambic one. But how to ascertain, how to make sure that what we will call it finally. So we will call it tetrameter, because you can see like the out of these 4 lines, 3 lines has 8 syllables, and then you have one diameter. Like the last line is quite different. So you have only 4 syllables, like for thou must die. But the majority is of the iambic. So you can say like this poem is written in the iambic tetrameter, because you need to talk about the majority. So this is the one thing you need to find out. But what is the function of that? So function is more important, as I said, like, and I reiterate once again. So the function is, because this poem is about a serious topic, virtue, the importance of virtue. Why virtue is so important. So as you can see here, that the complexity of poem increases. So in the first 4 lines, you have only 1 multisyllabic words. Fine. But in stanza 2, you have 3 multisyllabic words. Then in stanza 3, you have 4 multisyllabic words. And in stanza 4, you have 5 multisyllabic words. So gradually, like very carefully, the writer has employed the complexity of the words. Like you have an example of simple word in morphology, like simple words are monosyllabic word, but complex words are disyllabic, trisyllabic, or more than 3 syllable words are known as. So here you can see this growing line after line, word after word. Other than that, like you can also sense some other phonological prominence. For example, you can see here the first line, sweet days, so cool, so calm, so bright. So again, the sibilance is there. So the sound or sh sound, they are known as sibilant, and they have a soothing effect. So the starting is very soothing, like sweet day, so cool, so calm, so bright, fine. But in the second line, that soothing effect is broken down, the bridle of the earth and sky. So the you have here the bridle, the b and d sound, they are the plosive sound, stop sounds, and stop sounds are generally, they are more harsh. So that's there. So again, like in stanza 2, you can see like bits, the rash, gazer, wipe the eyes. Again, the plosive, break the iambic meter. So that thing is important. You need to find out what type of sound is used, what type of phonological process is there, and what is the function of that phonological process. For example, in the last line, there is an abrupt ending. So again, as you can see, like in the 3 lines, there is iambic tetrameter, but in the last line, you have iambic diameter, because death is always abrupt, because no one is thinking about death. Everyone is thinking about living, 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 living. But that living is going to be stopped by one full stop, and that full stop is your death. So again, that's why you have like the 4th line is in diameter. So as I said, like to find out what is there is important, but at the same time, what is the function, that is also important. So as you can see, this is an entire poem. Like the last line is very short, very abrupt, and there is a purpose for that. So likewise, you need to analyze the text. For example, again, like sweet, and there is example of the word sweet is repeated many times, but you need to find out like whether the meaning of the sweet in each line or in each usage is the same or different. So sweet day, sweet rose, sweet spring, sweet, as in only a sweet and virtuous soul. So a sweet day and sweet soul cannot have the same meaning. Fine. So and the sweets in the plural form again has a different meaning. So that you need to find out thing. At the same time, you can also employ some other effect. So here you have a chiaroscuro effect. Like chiaroscuro is a terminology used in architecture where the light and shade is used to highlight the architecture of a building or the landscape. So similarly, the chiaroscuro effect you can find here in the entire poem, like day and bright, earth and sky. So one thing is dark, another thing is light. So this thing is very well reflected in this poem. So, and then like once you have an interpretation, then you can go for a perspective. So here we have 2 perspectives. One perspective is by Wordsworth. Like Wordsworth defines poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility. But at the same time, you have a contrary perspective by T.S. Eliot. And T.S. Eliot says like poetry is not a turning loose of emotion, but an escape from emotion. And it is not the expression of personality, but an escape for personality. So when you look at this entire poem and the structure of this poem, you know that it is not spontaneous, because it cannot be an accident that in the first stanza there is only one multisyllabic word, and in sentence 2 there are 3, then 4, then 5, and then like the pattern, the rhyme scheme, when you look at the choice of words that you have, so it is like well contemplated. So you can negate Wordsworth statement that poetry is never spontaneous overflow. Always you need to think very hard to write a good piece of text. As what T.S. Eliot says, like poetry is not a turning loose of emotion, but an escape from emotion. That you have an emotion and you need to write about that emotion. So you are writing it, but it is well contemplated. So thank you all. This is my presentation, and if you have any question, comments, or feedback, you can ask me. I will try to clarify it. So this is from my end. So I stop here, and you have any question, you can please raise. Over to you.
And now this academic talk is open for the discussion. So anyone, your opinion and discussions, welcome. We are welcoming. We have a comment in the chat box from Dr. Subhadini Ramesh. It's a very informative talk, but she has another meeting, so she left, I think so. Yes, Dr. Rohan, are you here?
Yes, ma'am. Sir, this was a very good talk, which was an eye-opener, because I've been teaching these poems for nearly all of my students, and most of my students are very familiar with all the poems and definitions that you have quoted. And I'm thinking that in future I could use, the phonological expressions also in order to explain it in a better sense to my students. So it was a real eye-opener, and I thank you for giving us this wonderful lecture. Hats off to you, sir. Thank you.
So shall we wind up with a vote of thanks? Dr. Rohan?
There is one doubt by Dr. I think Muralidharan. If the interpretation is different from person to person, what we have to do? The point is like interpretation is different from person to person. That is quite correct, because each individual has an agency. Each individual has a different way of looking at the word, that we all agree. But again, that each individual's way of looking at the word is not drastically that different that it will defy common sense. So that's why we have interpreter communities, the term used by Stanley Fish, that it must filter through that common sense. It must filter through that interpretive communities, or it must filter through the logical argument. Even if we are saying that dog is a dinosaur, then we must have an argument to prove that dog is a dinosaur. And if we do not have an argument to prove dog is a dinosaur, that means like this argument is not valid. So that is basically the thing, like what we need to do. We need to think logically, that is one thing, or we can be the part of interpretive community, that is another thing. And the third thing is, even if we are stubborn interpreter, we want that our voice is to be heard, then we need to be more rigorous in our interpretation. We need to be more argumentative in our interpretation, and we need to provide more examples that will prove that why our interpretation is valid. That I want to say.
Is there any questions from the participants, audience? So, shall we wind up with a vote of thanks? Prashanta?
I think Tarushi has raised her hand.
Oh,
Tarushi, you're most welcome to talk.
oh,
I audible?
yeah.
Yeah, my question is, so when we consider about poems, it's okay. I mean, it's possible to interpret using phonological interpretation because we have alliteration and so many literary techniques. But when we come to 20th century, like modern dramas and all, is there any possibility to apply this process? How can we interpret using phonological process?
Yeah, the important thing is like language is made of sound. So whether you are reading a modern poetry, whether you are reading Elizabethan poetry, without sounds, like there are no words, and without sounds, like there are no construction. So like certain things which there is a possibility you may not find in modern poetry. For example, the rhyme scheme you will not find, alliteration or the example of assonance you will not find. But again, you will agree that a poetry must sound like a poetry, and a prose must sound like a prose. There is a difference between prose and poetry that we still have, and we have not merged that line between them. So quite often, to reply to your answer, I must say that, and I also tell my regular students that don't focus in the center, always focus in the margin. So when you read a poem, modern poetry, then try to find out like why a particular writer has used semicolon, why a particular writer has used hyphen, or why in that particular line only two words and in other line there are 5 or 6 words. So even if you try to focus on those things, those or margin, that means like in morphology, generally we have two types of words like content word and function words. Most of the time, content words are like noun, verbs, and adjective adverbs, and the function words are like determiners, fine, then articles or like prepositions. So when I say like look at the margin, that means you need to focus, you need to change your focus from the center to the margin. And when you shift your center, then definitely you will go for more meaningfulness, because most of the time our focus is on the center, and very often we neglect what is there in the margin. And when you just shift that focus and you try to pay attention to those insignificant words like of, the use of of, the use of ass, why writer has used that, then definitely you can have. So phonological processes, that is one term, and like you have vowel reduction or assimilation, assonance. But my earnest request or like my suggestion is that you treat phonological process as simply sound, the use of sound by the writer. So don't label them like assimilation, assonance, alliteration, because they are like they have been used and misused by writers so often that they have become cliched. So even if you find certain alliteration, then no one will say something great about it. So you need to just shift your focus. You need to try to find out like why a particular word is used, or what type of syntagmatic and paradigmatic practices are used by the writer. Then you can reach to more meaningfulness, that I would like to say.
Thank you, sir.
Is there any more discussions from the audience? So we'll wind up this discussion with a vote of thanks. Krishanta?
Okay, madam. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay. Good evening, all of you. Actually, it was a very rich tapestry. This lecture was filled with everything: phonetics, phonology, interpretation, stubborn interpreters, and interpretative community, and phonological processing literature, and everything. It's a very rich tapestry. It is a very insightful lecture for all of us. And it's my great honor and privilege to deliver the vote of thanks here, today's enlightened lecture, entitled From Sound to Sense, Phonological Processing Literary Interpretation by the esteemed Professor Amitabh Vikram Devindi. First and foremost, I extend our heartfelt gratitude to Professor Devindi for this thought-provoking lecture, and undoubtedly expanded our understanding of this subject. That means phonology and phonetics, and it helps to other literary theories and everything. And again, I thank you, Professor, for your session today. And next, I would like to thank all the participants who have joined today, especially our friends and the dear brotherhood and all the other participants from different countries and everywhere. Thank you all. And finally, special thanks goes to our facilitator today, Senior Lecturer in Linguistics, Dr. Niruba Jayasundara, actually whose hard work has made this lecture possible today. Thank you, madam. And Dr. Rohan Savarimuthu, Senior Lecturer in English and Head, Department of Information Technology. Thank you very much, sir. And once again, thank you all for being a part of this memorable evening today. And let us continue to foster a spirit of inquiry and dialogue as we move forward in our academic pursuits. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Professor Amitabh. It's a very
Thank you,
thoughtful
ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
lecture. Thank you.